My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 28 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. And if you had met me 2 years ago, you probably would have described me with one word: quiet. Not weak, not shy, just quiet. I was the kind of person who apologized when someone bumped into me, the kind of daughter who stayed silent at family dinners while everyone else talked over her, the kind of woman who spent her whole life trying not to disappoint people who were already disappointed in her before she even opened her mouth. And for most of my life, I believed maybe they were right about me. Maybe I really was the family embarrassment. Maybe I really wasn't enough. But everything changed the morning my mother looked me in the eyes inside a crowded courthouse and whispered something I will never forget. "Please," she said, "don't ruin this family any more than you already have." At the time, I almost believed her. But then the judge looked up from the courtroom bench, called my name, and suddenly the same people who ignored me for years couldn't even breathe. What happened next destroyed my family's lives forever. And to understand why, I need to take you back to where it all started. I grew up in a beautiful house outside Denver. Big windows, perfect lawn, expensive cars in the driveway. From the outside, we looked like one of those families people envy. But inside that house, love had conditions, and I learned that very early. My older brother Ethan was the golden child. Straight teeth, perfect smile, football captain, loud confidence. My younger sister Madison was my mother's little princess, cheerleader, popular, always posting photos with captions about family first while treating me like I barely existed. And then there was me, the quiet middle child. I liked books, drawing, numbers, silence. That alone made me different enough for my father to call me strange. I still remember being 12 years old at the dinner table when Ethan slammed his math book shut and groaned dramatically. "I hate algebra." My father laughed and rubbed his shoulder. "That's because athletes don't need math, son." Then he pointed at me. "Olivia likes that boring stuff. Maybe she can do your homework." Everyone laughed, even my mother. I laughed too. Because when you're treated like a joke long enough, eventually you start helping people tell it. But I had no idea those little moments were shaping the rest of my life. Every achievement I had was minimized. When Ethan scored one touchdown, my parents threw a backyard party. When I won a statewide academic scholarship, my mother said, "That's nice, honey," without even looking up from her phone. I wish I noticed the signs earlier. I wish I understood that some families don't just play favorites. Some families need one child to fail so the others can feel important. And in our family, that child was me. I was 26 when everything finally began collapsing. At the time, I worked as a financial analyst for a small investment firm downtown. The pay was decent. The hours were exhausting. But I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt respected somewhere. Not at home. Not by my family. But somewhere. Then Ethan got engaged. And suddenly the entire Carter family acted like the royal wedding was happening. My mother cried over flower arrangements. My father offered to pay for a luxury venue even though he constantly complained about money whenever it involved me. Madison posted engagement countdowns every single day like she was personally marrying a prince. And Ethan? He loved every second of it. One Sunday evening, my parents invited everyone over for dinner. I should have known something was wrong the second my father poured me wine before I sat down. He was only nice when he wanted something. Dinner started normally enough. Then my mother smiled across the table. "Olivia," she said sweetly, "you're doing well financially now, right?" I froze slightly. I guess." Ethan leaned back casually. "We've had some unexpected wedding expenses." There it was. My father folded his hands together. "Family supports family." I stared at them. "You want money?" My mother immediately looked offended. "Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like we're asking for charity." I almost laughed, because that's exactly what they were doing. Ethan sighed dramatically. "It's not even that much." "How much?" 30,000. I nearly dropped my fork. "What?" Madison rolled her eyes. God, Olivia, relax. Relax. $30,000. Almost my entire savings. I looked at my father, expecting him to say it was a joke. He didn't. Instead, he stared at me coldly. This family has sacrificed a lot for you. My chest tightened. Sacrificed? I paid my own college tuition with scholarships, bought my own car, worked through school. But somehow, they had rewritten history so completely that they actually believed I owed them. I can't give you $30,000, I said quietly. The room changed instantly. My mother's smile vanished. Ethan scoffed. Madison muttered, "Unbelievable." And then my father said the sentence that stayed in my head for months. "You always ruin everything." Silence. I felt my face burn. "You're really choosing money over your own brother?" I looked around the table. Not one person defended me. Not one. That's when I realized something horrifying. I wasn't family to them. I was an emergency bank account they expected to obey. And the moment I said no, they hated me for it. After that dinner, things got worse. Way worse. My mother stopped calling. Madison posted passive-aggressive quotes online about selfish people. Ethan sent me a text that simply said, "Don't come to the wedding if you can't support it." That one hurt more than I expected. Not because of the wedding, but because it confirmed something I spent years trying not to believe. Their love had always depended on what I could give them. Then came the family brunch. The moment I truly understood how far they were willing to go. My Aunt Denise hosted everyone at a restaurant downtown. The second I walked in, I felt tension. Conversations stopped. People looked away. I sat quietly near the end of the table while my cousins talked about wedding plans. Then Ethan raised his glass dramatically. "I just want to thank everyone supporting us during this stressful time." Several relatives nodded sympathetically. Then he looked directly at me. "Some people care more about their savings accounts than family." A few uncomfortable laughs spread around the table. My chest tightened. My mother didn't stop him. My father smirked. And suddenly I realized they wanted to embarrass me publicly. They wanted the family to see me as selfish. I stood up slowly. "I'm leaving." But before I could walk away, my father spoke loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "There she goes. Olivia always runs away when things get hard." That sentence shattered something inside me. Because all my life, I stayed quiet to keep peace. And they mistook my silence for weakness. I walked out of that restaurant fighting tears. But what happened next still shocks me. Because that night, someone knocked on my apartment door and changed everything. It was almost midnight. I opened the door expecting takeout. Instead, I saw my grandmother's lawyer, Mrs. Evelyn Harper, a woman I hadn't seen since my grandmother's funeral 2 years earlier. She held a thick folder against her chest. "Olivia," she said softly, "may I come in?" The second she sat down, I knew something was wrong. Or maybe, something had been wrong for a very long time. She slid the folder across my coffee table. "I didn't know if I should tell you this," she admitted. "But after what I heard at brunch today, you deserve the truth." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were legal documents, bank transfers, property records, letters. And then I saw my grandmother's signature. My stomach dropped. "What is this?" Mrs. Harper looked heartbroken. "Your grandmother left you a trust." I blinked. "What?" "She adored you, Olivia. She always said you were the only one who visited her without asking for something." Tears immediately filled my eyes. Because it was true. While everyone else ignored Grandma during her final years, I visited every weekend. I brought groceries, helped clean her house, sat with her during chemotherapy. Not because I wanted anything, because I loved her. Mrs. Harper continued carefully. "She left you nearly $2 million. I stopped breathing. "What?" "But your parents contested the will." The room spun. "They said you manipulated her, claimed you pressured her while she was sick." My hands shook. They what? Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. They delayed the case for 2 years. And then she said the sentence that changed my entire life. The final court hearing is next Friday. That's when everything clicked into place. The pressure, the manipulation, the money demands. My family wasn't desperate because of Ethan's wedding. They were desperate because they were losing access to my grandmother's fortune. And suddenly every cruel thing they'd done made horrifying sense. Friday arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before. I kept replaying every insult, every dismissal, every moment my family made me feel worthless. And now we were all walking into a courtroom together pretending to be civilized. The courthouse smelled like old paper and coffee. My mother refused to look at me. Ethan whispered something to Madison that made her laugh quietly. My father looked furious just seeing me there. Then my mother leaned close and whispered, "Please don't embarrass this family." Embarrass. That word again. I almost laughed, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid anymore. The hearing began. Their lawyer argued my grandmother had been confused near the end of her life, that I manipulated her emotionally, that I isolated her. Listening to them rewrite reality felt surreal. Then the judge turned toward me. "Miss Carter," he said calmly, "would you like to speak?" My legs trembled as I stood, and suddenly I saw it. My family's expressions, smug confidence. They truly believed I would stay quiet again. But they underestimated one thing. I had spent my whole life observing people, and I remembered everything. I spoke slowly, clearly. I talked about Grandma's hospital visits, the weekends together, the birthdays my family skipped, the nights she cried because nobody called. And then, I opened my folder. Phone records, medical schedules, voicemails, handwritten letters from Grandma. One by one, their lies collapsed. The courtroom became silent. Then the judge picked up one particular letter. He adjusted his glasses and read aloud. "To my granddaughter Olivia, thank you for loving me when everyone else was too busy loving my money." My mother went pale. Ethan looked sick. And for the first time in years, I watched my family realize they were losing control. The judge requested a short recess. My family cornered me immediately outside the courtroom. My father's voice shook with rage. "What are you doing?" I stared at him calmly. "The truth." My mother looked terrified now. "Olivia. Sweetheart. Sweetheart. Interesting how quickly cruelty turns into affection when money disappears. You're humiliating us." "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourselves." Ethan stepped closer aggressively. "You're seriously destroying this family over money?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "You already destroyed this family." Silence. Then Madison snapped. "You've always been jealous of us." That almost made me laugh. Jealous? Of people who only loved each other conditionally? Of a family built entirely on appearances? No, I wasn't jealous anymore. I was finally awake, and they could feel it. But they still didn't know the worst part. Because my grandmother left more than money. She left evidence, detailed evidence, letters describing how my parents pressured her for money repeatedly, notes about Ethan gambling, records showing my father secretly borrowed against Grandma's property years earlier. And when court resumed, everything exploded. The judge reviewed the new evidence silently for almost 20 minutes. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then finally, he looked up. "Olivia Carter," he said firmly. My heart pounded. "Please approach the bench." I stood slowly. Behind me, I heard my mother whisper, "Oh my God." The judge looked directly at me. "Based on the evidence presented today, this court finds the original trust entirely valid." My mother began crying instantly, but he wasn't finished. He continued, "And furthermore, this court is referring evidence of financial misconduct for additional investigation." Everything froze. My father's face lost all color. Ethan stared forward in shock. Madison looked ready to faint. And suddenly I understood something powerful. The people who spent years making me feel small were terrified of me now. Not because I screamed, not because I threatened them, but because I finally stopped protecting their lies. The weeks after court felt unreal. Family members who ignored me suddenly called nonstop. Relatives apologized awkwardly. People who believed my parents' version of me suddenly wanted lunch. But the strangest part? My family completely collapsed without someone to blame. Ethan's wedding was postponed indefinitely after financial problems surfaced. My father became the subject of investigations connected to hidden debts. Madison stopped posting online entirely. And my mother, she called every day crying. At first I answered. Then one evening she said something that finally changed everything. "You could have handled this privately." Privately, meaning quietly, meaning invisibly, meaning protecting them while they hurt me. I realized then that she still didn't understand what she'd done. She wasn't sorry for the betrayal. She was sorry everyone saw it. That was the moment I stopped answering. 6 months later, I bought a small home near the mountains. Nothing flashy, just peaceful. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. I started sleeping better, laughing more, living without fear of disappointing people who never intended to love me properly anyway. And something unexpected happened. I stopped hating myself. That was the biggest revenge of all. Not the money, not the courtroom, not watching their lies collapse. It was finally realizing I was never the problem. I had simply grown up surrounded by people who needed me to feel small so they could feel important. And once I understood that, they lost their power forever. Almost a year later, I received one final letter from my mother. Handwritten, short. It said, "I still don't understand why you did this to us." I stared at that sentence for a long time, because even after everything, she still believed truth was betrayal, that exposing lies was cruelty, that protecting myself was selfish, and honestly, that made me sad more than angry. Some people are so committed to their version of reality, they can't survive the truth. I never replied to the letter. Instead, I folded it carefully and placed it beside one of my grandmother's old notes. The one that said, "Never apologize for becoming stronger after being treated unfairly." I keep that note in my kitchen now, and every morning when sunlight hits the counter, I read it again. Not because I'm angry anymore, but because I finally understand something I wish I knew years ago. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the deepest pain, and sometimes the people who call you weak are terrified of the day you finally realize your worth. My family spent years treating me like an embarrassment, but in the end, the judge didn't call me up to shame me. He called me up because the truth finally had a voice, and for the first time in my life, about 3 months after I stopped speaking to my family, I thought the story was over. I really did. The court case had ended. The trust was settled. The investigations around my father were moving quietly through the legal system, and for the first time in years, my life felt calm. Then my phone rang at 2:13 in the morning. I remember staring at the screen half asleep. Ethan. For a second, I almost ignored it. But something in my chest tightened, because my brother never called me unless something was wrong. I answered carefully. "Hello?" Silence. Then I heard breathing. Heavy breathing. And suddenly Ethan spoke in a voice I barely recognized. "Dad's gone." I sat upright instantly. "What?" "He left." The words felt unreal. My father didn't leave things. He controlled things. Controlled people. Controlled rooms. Controlled conversations. Men like him didn't disappear quietly. But according to Ethan, that's exactly what happened. My father emptied several accounts overnight and vanished before sunrise. No note, no warning, nothing. And suddenly the same family who spent years treating me like an outsider was collapsing without the man who controlled it all. I drove to my childhood home before sunrise, and what I saw there still breaks my heart. The house looked smaller somehow. Or maybe the illusion was finally gone. My mother sat at the kitchen table wearing yesterday's makeup. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her coffee cup. Madison cried quietly in the corner. Ethan paced near the window. Nobody looked powerful anymore. Nobody looked untouchable. They looked scared. And for the first time in my life, I realized something important. Toxic families often survive because everyone is terrified of one person. Once that person disappears, the entire structure collapses. My mother looked up at me with swollen eyes. He took everything. I stayed silent. He emptied accounts, sold investments, even borrowed against the house. Ethan slammed his hand against the counter. He ruined us. Ruined. Interesting word. Because for years they accused me of ruining the family simply for saying no. But this? This was real destruction. I should have felt satisfied. After everything they did to me, maybe part of me should have enjoyed watching them panic. But honestly, I just felt tired. Tired of the lies. Tired of the manipulation. Tired of a family that only seemed capable of loving each other during emergencies. Then my mother said something quietly that stunned me. We didn't know how bad things were. I looked at her carefully, and for the first time, I believed her. Over the next few weeks, horrifying details surfaced. My father had been drowning in debt for years. Secret loans, failed investments, gambling, and somehow, none of us knew. Or maybe we didn't want to know, because my father built his entire identity around appearing successful. Expensive suits, luxury dinners, big speeches about discipline and responsibility. But behind closed doors, everything was collapsing. And instead of admitting failure, he used control. Control over my mother, control over Ethan, control over me. Suddenly my childhood made sense. Why he always mocked weakness, why he punished vulnerability, why he needed constant admiration. Because deep down, he was terrified. Terrified someone would discover he wasn't the powerful man he pretended to be. And the cruelest part? He taught the rest of the family to survive by following his example. That's why my mother enabled him. That's why Ethan copied him. That's why Madison cared so much about appearances. And that's why I became quiet. In dysfunctional families, everybody adapts differently to survive. Some become bullies. Some become performers. Some disappear into silence. And I was the one who disappeared. One evening, Ethan showed up at my house unexpectedly. I almost didn't open the door, but something about his face stopped me. He looked exhausted, older somehow, like life had finally hit him all at once. We sat on my back porch in silence for several minutes before he finally spoke. You know Dad used my name for loans? I turned slowly. What? He nodded. I signed papers without reading them. I stared at him. And suddenly the golden child didn't look golden anymore. He looked broken. I thought he was helping me build credit, Ethan whispered. I didn't know. His voice cracked. That was the first time in my entire life I saw genuine fear in my brother. Not arrogance, not ego, fear. He used me, Ethan admitted quietly. And strangely, hearing him say that hurt more than I expected. Because for years I believed Ethan was just cruel. But now I understood something deeper. He had spent his whole life trying to earn our father's approval too. The difference was, Ethan became what Dad wanted. I became what Dad rejected. But both of us lost ourselves trying to survive him. That realization changed everything between us. A week later, my mother asked to meet me alone. We met at a small coffee shop outside downtown. She looked nervous, fragile, older than I remembered. For several minutes she just stirred her tea silently. Then finally she looked at me. I failed you. Simple words, but hearing them nearly shattered me. Because all my life, I waited for my mother to notice my pain, to defend me, to choose me just once. And now here she was finally admitting it. Tears filled her eyes. Your father always said you were too sensitive, she whispered. After a while, I started repeating it too. I couldn't speak. I thought keeping peace was protecting the family. She laughed bitterly. But peace built on fear isn't peace at all. That sentence stayed with me for days, because she was right. Our family never had peace. We had silence. And there's a difference. Silence hides pain. Real peace heals it. About 2 months later, investigators located one of my father's hidden storage units. Ethan asked if I would come with him to sort through it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with it. But another part needed closure. The unit smelled like dust and old paper. Inside were boxes filled with financial documents, unpaid bills, fake investment reports, and dozens of family photo albums. That part shocked me most, because my father never seemed sentimental. Yet there he was, preserving years of memories carefully in labeled boxes, birthday parties, vacations, school photos. Then I found something strange. A smaller box hidden underneath old files. Inside were drawings, mine, sketches I made as a kid, every single one carefully saved. I froze. Because my father used to mock my art constantly. He once called it useless. Yet somehow, he kept everything. At the bottom of the box was a folded note in my father's handwriting. Olivia sees things differently. That scares me sometimes. But maybe it's also why she's stronger than the rest of us. I sat there staring at those words for what felt like forever. And honestly, that hurt more than the insults ever did, because it meant he understood me all along. He just chose pride over love. Nearly a year passed before we saw my father again. I was leaving work one rainy evening when I noticed a man sitting on a bench across the street. At first I didn't recognize him. Then he looked up, and my stomach dropped. He looked thinner, smaller, older. For the first time in my life, my father looked human. Not intimidating, not powerful, just tired. I almost kept walking, but he stood slowly. Olivia. Hearing my name in his voice after so long felt surreal. We sat inside a nearby diner for almost 2 hours, mostly in silence. Then finally he spoke. I thought if people believed I was strong, I wouldn't feel weak anymore. I looked at him carefully. You hurt everyone. He nodded slowly. I know. No excuses, no manipulation, just exhaustion. And somehow, that made it harder to hate him. Then he looked directly at me. You were the only honest person in this family. I didn't know what to say, because all my life I wanted his approval. And now that I finally had it, it felt empty. That's the tragedy of toxic families. Sometimes the apology arrives years after the damage. A month later, something happened I never thought possible. We all sat together again. Not perfectly, not magically healed, but honestly. No fake smiles, no performances, no pretending. Just damaged people finally telling the truth. Ethan admitted he built his entire personality around making Dad proud. Madison confessed she constantly felt pressure to appear perfect online because she thought love depended on appearances. My mother cried while apologizing for every moment she stayed silent. And my father, he simply listened. Quietly. Like a man finally understanding the consequences of his choices. At one point he looked at me and asked softly, "Why did you come back?" I thought about that question for a long time, then answered honestly, "Because I didn't want to become angry forever." Silence filled the room. And for once, it didn't feel heavy. It felt real. People love revenge stories because they expect power to look loud, explosive, dramatic. But real power? Real power is quieter than that. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to hate yourself anymore. Sometimes justice is telling the truth after years of silence. And sometimes healing means understanding that the people who hurt you were broken long before they broke you. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it frees you from carrying their damage forever. My family spent years making me feel invisible, but losing them taught me something unexpected. Being ignored is painful, but abandoning yourself to earn love hurts even more, and I refuse to do that ever again. Today I'm 30 years old. I still live near the mountains. I still drink coffee too late at night. I still keep Grandma's note in my kitchen. But now when I look in the mirror, I don't see the embarrassing daughter anymore. I see someone who survived, someone who finally spoke, someone who learned that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. Sometimes the quietest people are simply waiting for the moment they realize they deserve better. And once they do, everything changes. So if you're listening to this while feeling ignored, dismissed, or unloved by the people who should protect you most, please hear me carefully. Their inability to value you does not define your worth. Some families only understand your importance after they lose access to you. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop begging people to love you correctly. Because the moment you finally choose yourself, the story changes. About 6 months after that final family dinner, I visited my grandmother's grave alone. It was early morning, cold air, quiet sky, soft wind moving through the trees, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, the kind that lets you think. I brought white lilies because they were her favorite. I stood there for a long time without speaking. And honestly, I didn't know what to feel anymore. For so many years, anger controlled my life. Anger at being ignored, anger at being blamed, anger at watching people love me only when I was useful to them. But standing there that morning, something felt different, lighter, like the pain finally stopped owning me. I looked down at her name on the stone and smiled sadly. "You were right about me," I whispered, because she always believed I was stronger than I thought, even when I didn't believe it myself. Then I sat beside the grave and remembered something she once told me when I was 15. We were baking cookies in her tiny kitchen, while my parents were at one of Ethan's football banquets. And she looked at me very seriously and said, "One day, this family will force you to choose between keeping peace and keeping your self-respect." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I did. Some people spend their whole lives protecting toxic peace, smiling through disrespect, accepting cruelty just to avoid conflict, staying silent because they're afraid truth will destroy the family. But truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. And eventually, lies always collapse under their own weight. People always ask what happened afterward, whether my family stayed together, whether my father changed, whether we became close again. The honest answer? Life isn't a perfect movie ending. Healing is messy, slow, complicated. My father eventually accepted a plea agreement connected to the financial investigation. Nothing dramatic. No handcuffs on television. Just consequences quietly arriving after years of bad decisions. These days he works at a small accounting office outside Denver. No luxury suits. No giant speeches. Just an older man trying to rebuild a life honestly. Ethan canceled the wedding permanently. At first everyone blamed the stress, but the truth was simpler. He finally realized he spent his entire life performing success instead of becoming someone real. Now he coaches high school football and seems happier than I've ever seen him. Madison disappeared from social media for almost a year. When she finally returned, the perfect filter version of herself was gone. No fake inspirational captions, no staged luxury photos, just honesty. Surprisingly, people liked the real her more. And my mother? She started volunteering at a cancer support center. I think guilt changed her. Or maybe losing the illusion of a perfect family finally forced her to see people clearly. We're not magically close now. But for the first time in my life, our conversations are real. No pretending, no performances, just truth. And honestly, that's enough for me. A few weeks ago, I found an old letter buried inside one of my desk drawers. A letter I wrote the night after the courthouse hearing. I never mailed it, never showed anyone. But reading it now almost made me cry. Because it was written by a version of me who still believed she needed revenge to feel valuable. Part of it said, "I hope one day you all understand how badly you hurt me." Back then, I thought justice meant making them suffer exactly the way I suffered. But life taught me something different. People already suffer inside the identities they create. My father suffered inside pride. My mother suffered inside fear. Ethan suffered inside expectations. Madison suffered inside appearances. And me? I suffered inside silence. We were all trapped in different versions of pain. The difference is, I finally escaped mine. If I'm being honest, the real revenge was never the courtroom. It wasn't the money. It wasn't exposing their lies. The real revenge happened quietly. Slowly. In moments nobody else saw. Like the first night I slept peacefully without wondering if my family secretly hated me. Or the first time I looked in the mirror without hearing my father's criticism in my head. Or the first holiday I spent alone without feeling guilty for protecting my peace. That was the real victory. Becoming someone who no longer needed approval from people incapable of giving healthy love. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. Some people will never become the family you deserved. No matter how much you sacrifice, no matter how quietly you suffer, no matter how hard you try to earn their affection. And at some point, you have to stop auditioning for love that should have been given freely. So if you've stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. Maybe parts of it felt painfully familiar. Maybe you know what it's like to sit at a dinner table feeling invisible. Maybe you know what it's like to become the family scapegoat simply because you refuse to play along with unhealthy behavior. Or maybe you're still in that stage where you keep hoping people will suddenly become who you needed them to be. I understand that feeling more than you know, but please remember this. Your worth does not shrink just because someone failed to see it. And protecting your peace does not make you selfish. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from the version of themselves built entirely around surviving other people's cruelty. Because healing doesn't begin when toxic people apologize. Healing begins the moment you finally believe you deserved better all along. My family once told me I ruined everything. But looking back now, the moment I finally spoke the truth was the moment my life truly began. And maybe, if you're brave enough to choose yourself too, yours can begin again as well.